They said I'd be nothing when I left the orphanage, a statistic, another kid aged out of the system with a garbage bag of belongings and a future as blank and gray as the concrete walls I was leaving behind. For 18 years, my life was a file in a cabinet, a name on a list, a bed in a room I shared with ghosts of other boys who had come and gone. They said my grandmother abandoned me, that she was just another name in a long line of disappointments. They were wrong about everything. What I inherited from her wasn't just an estate. It was a truth that would either save me or bury me. And if you're listening to this, maybe it's because you know what it's like to be handed a story about yourself that just doesn't feel right. If that's you, hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about rewriting those stories. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction. Miss Albright, my caseworker for the last 5 years, had a face that was permanently set to mild disappointment. She slid a manila envelope across the battered metal desk that separated us. It was thin. My entire documented life, I guessed, and it barely made a sound. "Leo," she said, her voice flat, practiced. "This is it. Your birth certificate, social security card, and $100 in cash. There's a bus ticket to the city shelter. They're expecting you." I didn't move. The air in the office was stale, smelling of old paper and the cheap lemon cleaner they used on the floors. Outside, a cold October rain was starting to fall, streaking the grime on the window. I'd watched that rain fall 16 times from a window in this building. This would be the last. "That's all?" I asked. My voice was quiet, a little rough. I hadn't used it much that day. She sighed, a little puff of air that said she'd had this exact conversation 1,000 times. "That's the standard package, Leo. You know the rules." I did. I knew all the rules. Rule 1, don't get attached. Rule 2, don't expect anything. Rule 3, when your time is up, you walk out the door and you don't look back. I had been practicing for this day my whole life, building a wall inside me brick by brick. But now that it was here, the wall felt thin as paper. I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing against hers. She flinched, just a little. We weren't supposed to touch. It wasn't a rule, just an understanding. We were case files, not children. "There is one other thing," she said, her eyes flicking to a drawer in her desk. She seemed hesitant, which was a new look for her. She pulled out a different envelope, this one thick and made of heavy, cream-colored paper. It looked ancient, important. My name was written on the front in elegant looping cursive. "Leo Vance. This came for you about a week ago, from a law firm." She slid it across the desk. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than my entire life in the manila envelope. "We're not supposed to give you outside correspondence that isn't vetted, but this is official. It's addressed to you on your 18th birthday. Legally, I have to give it to you now." I stared at the name on the return address. Davies and Finch, attorneys at law. I'd never heard of them. I didn't know anyone who would hire a lawyer. The people I knew didn't have things worth protecting. "Who is it from?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. "It doesn't say, just the firm." She stood up, a clear signal that our time was over. "The bus leaves in an hour, Leo. Good luck." She didn't say it like she meant it. She said it like it was a line from a script. I stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum. I had my garbage bag of clothes in the hall, my thin jacket, and now 2 envelopes. One held my past, the other a complete mystery. I walked out of her office without saying goodbye. No one ever did. On the bus, the city blurred past the rain-slicked window. The shelter was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood people avoided. I was supposed to go there, find a bed, and start my life as nothing, a statistic. But the cream-colored envelope was burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled it out, the paper soft under my calloused fingers. I broke the wax seal, a stylized D, and unfolded the letter inside. The words were dense, full of legal terms I didn't understand. Estate, beneficiary, probate. But I found the names. My name, Leo Vance, and another one, Alara Vance, my grandmother. According to the letter, my grandmother had passed away 2 years ago, and she had left me everything, her entire estate. I was to report to the office of a Mr. Alistair Davies to discuss the terms of my inheritance. I read it again, and again. The words swam in front of my eyes. My grandmother, the woman they told me had signed me over to the state, without a second thought. The one who, according to my file, wanted nothing to do with me. She had left me something. She had remembered me. The bus hissed to a stop. The automated voice announced the stop for the shelter. I looked out the window at the line of tired, hopeless men and women waiting to get inside for the night. That was my future, the one they had planned for me. Then I looked down at the letter in my hand. It was a different future, a question mark. It could be a mistake, a cruel joke. It could be nothing. But it was the first time in my life I felt like I had a choice. The bus doors opened. I stayed in my seat. As the bus pulled away from the curb, leaving the shelter behind, I felt a tremor of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just possibility. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I had an address for a lawyer's office and a name I thought I'd forgotten. Alara. For the first time, I wasn't just a kid aging out. I was a beneficiary. I was someone's grandson. And I was going to find out what that meant. The law office of Davies and Finch was in a part of the city I had only ever seen in movies. The buildings were old, made of stone and dark brick, with names carved above the doors. It was the kind of place where money was so old it had become quiet. I stood across the street for a long time, my garbage bag slung over my shoulder, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's world. My clothes were worn, my shoes were thin, and I was sure everyone who walked past could see the orphanage stamped all over me. Finally, I took a deep breath and crossed the street. The lobby was all marble and dark wood, silent except for the soft clicking of a secretary's keyboard. She looked up as I entered, her polite smile tightening just a fraction when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as polished as the floor. "I'm here to see Mr. Davies," I said, my own voice sounding rough and out of place. "My name is Leo Vance." Her eyebrows shot up. She looked from me to a folder on her desk, then back to me. The surprise on her face was clear. She wasn't expecting me, or maybe she wasn't expecting someone who looked like me. "Of course, Mr. Vance, he's expecting you. Please, have a seat." She led me to a waiting area with leather chairs that probably cost more than everything I owned. I perched on the edge of one, my plastic bag resting on the floor beside me. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. A few minutes later, a man in a perfectly tailored suit appeared in a doorway. He was older, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through the shabby clothes and the nervous energy. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and deep. "I'm Alistair Davies. Please come in." His office was even more intimidating. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A large mahogany desk sat in front of a window that overlooked the city. He didn't sit behind the desk, though. He gestured for me to take a seat in one of the 2 comfortable chairs in front of it, and he took the other. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. He was meeting me, not presiding over me. "Thank you for coming in so promptly," he began, folding his hands. "I must admit, we had some difficulty locating you. The state systems are labyrinthine." "Ms. Albright gave me your letter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "Yes. Well, let's get to it, shall we? Leo, your grandmother, Alara Vance, passed away just over 2 years ago. Her will named you as her sole heir. He said it so simply, as if he were telling me the time, but the words hit me like a physical blow. Sole heir. Me, the boy who had nothing. I don't understand, I stammered. They told me she gave me up, that she didn't want me. Mr. Davies' expression softened with something that looked like pity. The stories told by institutions are often simplified, Leo. The truth is usually far more complex. Your grandmother loved you very much. She wrote to you every year on your birthday. The letters were always returned, unopened. A lump formed in my throat. Letters. All those years I thought no one was thinking of me, and she had been writing. The orphanage never told me. They had erased her. What did she leave me? I asked, my voice cracking. She left you her property, he said. A small farmhouse and about 50 acres of land in a place called Havenwood. It's about a 3-hour bus ride from here. He slid a file across the small table between us. I opened it. Inside were photographs. A small, simple white house with a wraparound porch, surrounded by trees. A big red barn with a sagging roof. Fields that were overgrown with weeds. It looked forgotten, neglected, but it was real. It was mine. It's not in the best shape, Mr. Davies continued gently. Alara was ill for a long time, and she couldn't keep up with it. And there is a complication. Of course there was. There was always a complication. The property has significant back taxes owed, he explained. About $5,000. You have 90 days to pay them or the county will seize the property and sell it at auction. The flicker of possibility I had felt on the bus died instantly. $5,000. He might as well have said $5 million. I had $100 to my name. But there's more, he said, his eyes holding mine. There is an interested party. A development corporation called Oak Valley Holdings has been trying to acquire the land for years. They know about the tax situation. They've made an offer to buy the property from the estate as is. They would pay off the taxes and give you $10,000. My mind reeled. $10,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was a new start. I could get an apartment, find a job, be a real person. I could leave the past behind completely. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. Why do they want it so badly? I asked. They're buying up a lot of the old family plots in that area, he said, a careful note in his voice. They say they're planning a luxury resort. Your grandmother's land is right in the middle of their desired parcel. He leaned forward slightly. Alara refused to sell. She fought them for years. It was very important to her that the land stay in the family, that it go to you. He pushed a large, dusty cardboard box toward me with the toe of his expensive shoe. These were her personal effects from the nursing home. Not much, I'm afraid. The house is as she left it. This box, the property, and the choice. That is your inheritance, Leo. The choice. Sell and have a future, or keep a piece of a past I didn't even know I had. $10,000 for a clean break, or a debt-ridden, dilapidated farmhouse that belonged to a woman who was a ghost to me. But she had fought for it. For me. I want to see it, I said, the words coming out before I had even really thought them through. I want to go to the house. Mr. Davies nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. I thought you might say that. He handed me a large, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy and ornate. This is the key to the front door. The bus to Havenwood leaves from the main terminal every morning at 8. I've included a ticket and a map in this envelope. He handed me another one, this one plain white. And a little extra to help you get by for a few days. Consider it an advance from the estate. I looked down at the key in my palm. It was cold and solid. It was the first key I had ever owned. Everything in the orphanage had been unlocked, open, nothing private. This key was the opposite of that life. It was a key to a secret, a history. My history. I left the lawyer's office with the cardboard box under one arm and the garbage bag in the other hand. The city felt different now. It was no longer just a place I had been sent to. It was a place I was leaving. I had a destination. I had a key. I was going home, even if I had no idea what home really was. The bus ride to Havenwood was a journey through a world I never knew existed. The city's gray canyons of steel and glass slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to smaller towns with quaint main streets, and finally to rolling hills and wide-open fields. The farther we went, the more the concrete seemed to dissolve, replaced by green and brown earth. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape shift, feeling a strange sense of unwinding inside me. Every mile we traveled felt like a mile further from the boy in the orphanage, the boy with no past and no future. I clutched the strap of my bag, the old iron key in my pocket, a heavy, reassuring weight. Inside the bag, next to my few changes of clothes, was the cardboard box from Mr. Davies. I hadn't opened it yet. It felt too private, like reading someone's diary. It was the last piece of my grandmother, and I wanted to be in her house before I looked inside. The bus was nearly empty by the time it pulled into Havenwood. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads, a gas station with a rusty sign, a general store with a fading Coca-Cola mural painted on the side, a post office and a handful of houses. That was it. I was the only one who got off. The bus driver gave me a curious look as he handed me my bag. "End of the line for you, son," he said. "You sure this is where you want to be?" "I think so," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He shrugged and closed the doors. The bus pulled away with a sigh of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The air smelled clean, earthy, full of pine and damp soil. It was so different from the city's exhaust fumes and the sterile, antiseptic smell of the institution. I pulled out the map Mr. Davies had given me. The Vance property was about 2 miles down a road that branched off the main highway. 2 miles didn't sound like much, but with the heavy box and the setting sun, it felt like a pilgrimage. The walk was lonely but not frightening. The road was paved for the first mile, then turned to gravel. Towering trees lined the path, their branches forming a canopy overhead. I saw a deer bound across the road in front of me, its white tail flashing before it disappeared into the woods. I had never seen a deer outside of a book before. The world felt bigger here, older. Finally, I saw it. A weathered wooden sign, half hidden by overgrown bushes that read, "Vance." A long, unkempt driveway led back from the road. I took a deep breath and started walking down it, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was just like the photograph, only more real, more sad. The white paint was peeling, revealing the gray wood beneath. The porch steps sagged in the middle. The windows were dark and dusty, like closed eyes. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. The barn stood behind it, its red paint faded to a dull brown, its roof looking like it might collapse in the next strong wind. But it was mine. The thought was staggering. After a lifetime of living in places that belonged to the state, to someone else, this piece of land, this broken-down house, belonged to me. I walked up the creaking steps of the porch, my footsteps echoing in the quiet air. I ran my hand along the wooden railing, feeling the splintered wood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. It was heavy, real. My hand trembled as I slid it into the lock. It turned with a loud, grating click that seemed to break a long-held silence. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing the darkness within. A wave of air washed over me, cool and musty, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something else. something faintly floral like dried lavender. I stepped inside, my garbage bag and box in hand, and closed the door behind me. I was plunged into near darkness, with only thin slivers of evening light filtering through the grimy windows. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out shapes, furniture draped in white sheets, like a room full of ghosts, a grand staircase rising up to the second floor, a stone fireplace dark and cold dominating one wall. It was a time capsule, a life paused. I set my things down by the door and walked slowly into the main living area. I reached out and pulled the sheet off a large armchair. A cloud of dust motes danced in the slivers of light. The chair was upholstered in a faded floral pattern. I could almost imagine her sitting here, my grandmother, a woman with no face, no voice, just a name. Alara. I moved through the downstairs rooms like a real ghost, my footsteps silent on the dusty floorboards. The kitchen had an old-fashioned stove and a porcelain sink. A calendar on the wall was still turned to a page from 2 years ago. In the dining room, a long wooden table was surrounded by sheet-covered chairs, waiting for a family that never came. Every object seemed to whisper a story I couldn't hear. I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, not just for the grandmother I never knew, but for the life I could have had here. The anger I had carried for so long at being abandoned began to curdle into a deep, aching sadness. She hadn't left this place willingly. You don't just walk away from a home like this. You are taken from it. As dusk settled, turning the light outside to a deep purple, I sat on the floor in the middle of the living room, the box of her personal effects in front of me. It was time. My hands shook as I broke the tape and opened the flaps. Inside, there wasn't much. A few worn paperback novels, a pair of reading glasses, a knitted shawl that still smelled faintly of that lavender scent, a small, tarnished silver picture frame, face down, and on top of it all, a thick, sealed envelope, just like the one the lawyer had given me, but this one felt different, softer, more personal. My name was on it in the same elegant script. I picked up the picture frame and turned it over. The photo was faded, a bit yellowed at the edges. It was of a woman, probably in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was graying and she had smile lines around her eyes. She was sitting in the very armchair I had just uncovered. She looked happy, peaceful. It was my grandmother. And sitting on her lap was a little boy, no older than 2, with a shock of messy dark hair and a wide, toothy grin. It was me. I stared at the picture, my throat tightening until I could barely breathe. I had no memory of this moment, no memory of her. But here was the proof. We had been together. She had held me. She had smiled at me. The story I had been told my whole life, that I was unwanted, a burden she had gladly handed over, was a lie. This picture was the truth. I carefully set the photo down and picked up the envelope. This was from her. I could feel it. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a stack of folded pages, covered in that same beautiful handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have come home. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old woman for the silence. The silence was never for me, my love. It was always for you." The words on the page blurred through the tears that filled my eyes. I was sitting in the dark, in a house full of ghosts, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't alone. I read on, the elegant script telling a story that would shatter my world and rebuild it all at once. The story of a grandmother's love, a father's sins, and a secret buried right under my feet. The letter was long, the pages filled from edge to edge with her flowing script. As I read, her voice seemed to fill the silent house, a voice I'd never heard but somehow recognized in the rhythm of her words. She told me about my mother, a bright, artistic soul who had fallen for the wrong man. My father, his name was Michael, and according to my grandmother, he was a charmer with a dark side, a man who chased easy money and always found trouble. He died in a car crash when I was just a baby, a fact I'd known from my file. What I didn't know was that it wasn't an accident. Your father got himself into debt, Leo, she wrote. Deep debt with very dangerous people. They weren't bankers, they were predators. The kind of men who don't forget and don't forgive. When he died, they decided his debt became mine. They started coming around, making threats. They wanted this land. They said your father had promised it to them as collateral. My blood ran cold. The faceless corporation, Oak Valley Holdings, suddenly had a face, a dark, menacing one. I couldn't protect both you and the farm, the letter continued. They were watching the house. They knew about you. I was terrified they would take you, use you to force me to sign over the deed. I was getting sick, my love. My heart was weak and I didn't have the strength to fight them and raise a little boy at the same time. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I hid you. She hadn't abandoned me. She had hidden me. She had placed me in the state system, believing it was the one place they would never think to look for the heir to a small, worthless-seeming farm. She had erased herself from my life, cut all ties and endured the silence, all to keep me safe. The returned letters suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. She had to make it look like she had truly walked away for my protection. They never stopped, she wrote. The company, Oak Valley, it's just a front for the same man your father owed. He's patient. He's been waiting all these years for me to die, thinking the state would get the land and he could buy it for pennies at auction. He doesn't know about you, Leo, or if he does, he thinks you're just some lost kid who will be happy to take a quick payout and disappear. He doesn't know you have your mother's strength and my stubbornness. I had to put the letter down for a moment, my head spinning. The neat, orderly story of my life, the unwanted child of a dead father and an absent grandmother, had been a fiction, a cover story. The reality was a dark, tangled mess of threats and sacrifice. The weight of her love, a love I never knew existed, settled on me. It was a heavy, beautiful, terrifying thing. I picked up the pages again. There was more. I couldn't fight them with force, so I fought them with time. For years, I saved every penny I could. I sold off my mother's jewelry. I took on mending work. I lived on almost nothing. I was saving for you, Leo, saving so that when you came home, you would have a chance, a real chance to keep this place, if you choose to. The money isn't in a bank. Banks leave a paper trail. It's safe. It's here. Everything I saved for you is where the heart of this home truly is. Not in the walls, but under the floor that supported us through all those years. Look for the hearth. It always kept us warm. The letter ended with a final heartbreaking plea. This land isn't just dirt and trees, Leo. It's our story. It's your mother's garden, your grandfather's barn, the porch where I rocked you to sleep. It's the only thing I have left to give you. Whatever you choose to do, know that I loved you more than words can say. Be brave. Be happy. Your loving grandmother, Ilara. I sat there in the moonlight-drenched room, the letter in my lap, tears streaming down my face. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was alone. I cried for the woman who had to give up everything to save him. I cried for the years we had lost, and for the first time I wasn't crying from a place of emptiness, but from a place of overwhelming fullness. My life wasn't a blank page. It was a secret story, and I was finally reading the last chapter. The choice Mr. Davies had spoken of was no longer a simple one between money and a piece of land. It was a choice between running from my father's legacy of fear or embracing my grandmother's legacy of love and defiance. Selling the farm now felt like a betrayal. It meant letting them win. It meant her sacrifice would have been for nothing, but staying Staying meant facing the people she had feared her whole life. It meant stepping into a fight I was in no way prepared for. I was 18 years old, with $100 and a garbage bag of clothes. They were a powerful corporation with a sinister history. It was an impossible choice. I stood up, my legs stiff. I walked to the fireplace, the great stone hearth that dominated the living room. It was cold, covered in a thick layer of dust. I ran my hand over the rough stones. The heart of the home. It always kept us warm. Her words echoed in my mind. I looked down at the wide wooden planks of the floor in front of the fireplace. They were old, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. One of them looked slightly different from the others, the seams around it just a little wider, the color a fraction darker. I knelt down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pressed on the edge of the board. It didn't move. I dug my fingernails into the crack, pulling, scraping until they were raw. It was stuck fast. I needed a tool, something to pry it up. I stumbled through the dark house to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I fumbled through drawers, finally finding a sturdy-looking butter knife. Back at the hearth, I wedged the tip of the knife into the seam and pried. The old wood groaned in protest. I put all my weight into it, and with a loud crack, the end of the board lifted. My breath caught in my throat. I worked the knife along the edge, and slowly, carefully, I lifted the plank free. Underneath, in the dark, hollow space, was a square metal box. That entire night, I felt suspended between two worlds. The world I had always known, a world of rules, of gray walls, of being told who I was, and this new world, a world of secrets, of love, of a history that was both a burden and a gift. The house was silent around me, but it felt alive with the weight of my grandmother's story. I looked at the metal box nestled in the darkness beneath the floor, and I felt a profound sense of dread and excitement. This was it, the culmination of her sacrifice, the beginning of my choice. I was paralyzed. The path of least resistance was so tempting. Take the developer's $10,000, walk away, and never look back. Start a new life, unburdened by this dangerous past. It was the logical thing to do, the safe thing. But my grandmother's words, her love, her fierce protection, they had rewired something in me. For my entire life, I had been taught to be small, to be quiet, to not cause trouble, to accept my lot. And here she was, in a letter from the grave, telling me to be brave, to fight. How could I ignore that? How could I honor her sacrifice by running away? I wandered through the house for hours, not exploring anymore, but just feeling. I ran my hand along the dusty banister of the staircase. I stood in the doorway of what must have been her bedroom, seeing the faint indentation on the pillow where her head used to rest. This wasn't just a property, it was the scene of a life, her life, and mine, for a brief, forgotten time. Selling it felt like selling her memory. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, you probably know what it feels like to stand at a crossroads like that, to have the floor drop out from under you, revealing a truth you never expected. You're faced with a choice that will define who you are, not just what you do. It's that moment where the story someone else wrote for you ends, and you have to pick up the pen yourself. Have you ever had a moment like that? A discovery that changed your entire past and forced you to choose your future? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and honestly, it helps to know you're not alone in these impossible moments. We're all just trying to find our way home. Now, let's get back to that night in the farmhouse, with the floorboard pulled up and a secret at my feet. Sometime before dawn, I made my decision. I wasn't going to run. I didn't know how I was going to fight, but I knew I had to stay. My grandmother didn't save this place for me just so I could sell it to the very people she was hiding me from. This was my ground, my fight. I owed it to her to at least try. With a newfound sense of purpose, I reached into the dark space and wrapped my hands around the metal box. It was heavy, solid. I lifted it out and placed it on the floor. It was an old Army surplus ammo can, painted dark green with a sturdy latch on the front. There was no lock. She had trusted that the hiding place was enough. My fingers trembled as I undid the latch. It sprang open with a metallic clang that echoed through the quiet house. I lifted the lid. My breath hitched. The box was filled with money, stacks and stacks of cash, bundled together with rubber bands, mostly 20s and 50s. I had never seen so much money in my life. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I could comprehend. I lifted one of the bundles. It felt solid, real. This was what she had saved. This was my chance. But beneath the money there was something else, a large oilskin-wrapped package. I carefully lifted it out. It was heavy and flat. I unwrapped it, the material crinkling softly. Inside was a thick file folder, and within the folder, two things. The first was the official deed to the property. Across the top, in big red letters, was the word paid. She had paid it off. The property was truly, completely mine, free of any mortgage. The only debt was the back taxes. The second thing in the folder was another stack of papers, held together with a clip. It was a ledger of sorts. On each page, in my grandmother's neat script, were dates, amounts, and notes. MV's debt, first payment, threat against the boy. MV's debt, second payment, they want the deed. MV Michael Vance, my father. She had been documenting everything. Every threat, every payment she was forced to make to keep them at bay before she hid me. This wasn't just a record, it was evidence. She hadn't just been saving money. She had been building a case. She was fighting them in the only way she knew how. Quietly, patiently, meticulously. Tucked into the back of the ledger was one last short letter. Leo, it read, if you found this, you found your courage. This money is your shield. Use it to pay the taxes. Use it to fix the roof. Use it to buy food and give yourself a warm place to sleep. But this ledger, this is your sword. Don't be afraid to use it. The man behind Oak Valley is named Marcus Thorne. He's a pillar of the community in the next county over, but he built his empire on the fear of people like your father. This ledger connects him to it all. Mr. Davies is a good man. He was your grandfather's friend. You can trust him. Show him this. Your grandfather used to say, you don't fight monsters by becoming one. You fight them by shining a light so bright they have nowhere left to hide. Be the light, my Leo. All my love, Grandma. I sat back on my heels, the ammo can open before me, the papers in my hand, my shield and my sword. She had left me an entire arsenal. The choice was no longer just about staying or leaving. It was about hiding or fighting back. Using the money quietly to pay the taxes and live under the radar, hoping they'd leave me alone, or using the ledger to expose them and bring on a war I couldn't possibly imagine. The sun was starting to rise, casting long golden fingers of light through the dusty windows. The light touched the picture of me and my grandmother, making it glow. In the photo, she was smiling and I was safe in her arms. She had spent her life protecting me in the shadows. Now it was my turn to protect her legacy in the light. I knew what I had to do. I carefully repacked the box, leaving out just one bundle of cash. I slid the heavy ledger into my bag. Then I stood up and walked to the front door. The morning air was crisp and cool. The world felt new. I wasn't the scared boy who had arrived here yesterday. I was Alara Vance's grandson, and I had a story to finish. I walked the 2 miles back to the town's general store. There was a single payphone on the outside wall. I picked up the receiver, fed it a quarter, and dialed the number for Mr. Davies' office, from the letterhead I had kept. It was early, but I was hoping he was the kind of man who started his day before the rest of the world. He was. Alistair Davies, his voice answered, sharp and clear. Mr. Davies, I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. It's Leo Vance. I'm at the farm. I need to see you. I've found something my grandmother left for me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him processing my words, the urgency in my tone. Leo, he said finally, his voice serious, stay right where you are. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 3 hours. The phone went dead. I hung up the receiver, a sense of relief washing over me. I had an ally, a real one. My grandmother had known, even then, that I would need one. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I walked back to the house, the bundle of cash in my pocket, feeling both powerful and dangerous. I went to the general store and bought supplies, bread, cheese, a jug of water, a flashlight, and a box of thick work gloves. The man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer with a kind face, gave me a curious look. You the Vance boy? He asked. I was startled. Yeah, I am. He nodded slowly. Figured. You've got your grandmother's eyes. She was a good woman, Ilara. Stubborn as a mule, but good. Welcome home, son. His words, so simple and accepting, almost brought me to tears. Welcome home. For the first time, it felt real. This wasn't just a property, it was a community, however small. A place where my name meant something, where my grandmother was remembered. Back at the house, I started to work. It was a small act of defiance, of claiming my space. I put on the gloves and started pulling the dust sheets off the furniture. I opened the windows, letting the fresh country air chase out the stale, musty smell. I swept the floors, clouds of dust rising in the sunbeams that now filled the house. It was a huge task. The house needed so much more than a simple cleaning, but with every sweep of the broom, I felt like I was reclaiming it, 1 inch at a time. This was my home now, and I would not let them take it. Just as the sun reached its midday peak, a sleek, dark car pulled up the long driveway. Mr. Davies got out, looking out of place in his city suit against the backdrop of the wild, overgrown farm. He walked up the porch steps, his eyes taking in the open windows and the sound of my sweeping. It seems you've been busy, he said, a hint of a smile on his face. There's a lot to do, I replied. I led him inside to the living room where the ammo cans sat on the floor, next to the open space where the floorboard had been. I didn't say a word. I just handed him the ledger. He sat down in the floral armchair, the one from the photograph, and began to read. I watched his face, his calm, professional demeanor, slowly giving way to a look of grim understanding, then to a quiet, simmering anger. He read for a long time, his fingers tracing my grandmother's handwriting. When he was finished, he closed the folder and looked at me. The kindness in his eyes was still there, but now it was forged with something harder, steel. Your grandmother, he said, his voice low, was a remarkable woman and a very brave one. She called this my sword, I said, nodding toward the ledger. She said you would know what to do with it. She was right, he said, standing up. Marcus Thorne. I know the name. He's a powerful man, untouchable, people say, but your grandmother has just reached out from the past and handed us the very thing that can bring him down. He looked around the room at the work I had started, at the sunlight streaming in. Oak Valley Holdings made another offer this morning, he told me. They increased it to $25,000. They're getting nervous. They must have heard the estate was being settled by a new heir. They think they can scare you into selling cheap and fast. I'm not selling, I said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even me. This is my home. Mr. Davies nodded, a look of profound respect on his face. Good. Then we fight. Here's what we're going to do. First, we use some of this cash, he gestured to the box, to pay those back taxes immediately. We take that weapon away from them. Second, I'm going to take this ledger back to my office and make several verified copies. The original will go into a secure bank vault. Third, I have a contact in the state attorney's office, a man who despises corruption. We are going to give him a copy, anonymously at first. We let him start pulling the thread. The plan was simple, elegant, and terrifying. It set in motion a chain of events that I couldn't stop. "What about me?" I asked. "For now," he said, his gaze serious, "you stay here. You be Leo Vance, the kid who inherited his grandma's old farm. You fix the place up. You become a part of this town. You live. Thorne and his people will be watching. The most powerful thing you can do is show them you are not afraid. You are putting down roots." He picked up the ledger and his briefcase. "I will handle the legal side, Leo. You handle the home front. Call me if you see anything suspicious. Anything at all." He walked to the door, then paused and turned back to me. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." After he left, the house felt different again. It was no longer just a refuge or a secret. It was a fortress, and I was its guardian. The days that followed were a blur of hard work. I used the money from the box to pay the taxes, the clerk at the county office giving me a surprised look when I handed her a thick stack of cash. I bought tools, lumber, paint. I started with the barn, patching the roof to stop the leaks. The work was brutal, my muscles ached, and my hands were covered in blisters. But every nail I hammered, every board I replaced felt like a victory. The town was slowly starting to accept me. The general store owner, whose name was Gus, started saving me the day-old newspapers. A neighboring farmer stopped by one afternoon and helped me figure out why the old well pump wasn't working. He didn't ask any questions. He just saw a kid who needed a hand and offered it. I was becoming part of the landscape, no longer just a ghost from the city. But the shadow of Oak Valley was always there. Cars I didn't recognize would sometimes drive slowly past the end of my driveway. Once, a man in a suit showed up at my door, claiming to be a real estate agent, making another, even more generous offer for the farm. His smile was slick and empty. I told him I wasn't interested. The look in his eyes when I closed the door was cold, calculating. They were testing me, pushing me. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. I got a call from Mr. Davies. The anonymous tip had worked. The state attorney was quietly investigating Marcus Thorne's finances, his land acquisitions. They were pulling the thread. The first snow of winter fell, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of white. It was beautiful, peaceful. I had repaired the main leaks in the house's roof, fixed the broken windows, and gotten the old wood stove in the kitchen working. The house was slowly coming back to life. I was coming back to life. I had gained weight. The haunted look in my eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. One cold December evening, I was sitting by the fire in the living room reading one of my grandmother's old books when I heard a car coming up the driveway. It wasn't Mr. Davies's car. This one was loud, a big truck. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. A large, dark pickup truck was parked in front of the house, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The driver's side door opened. A large man got out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a heavy work coat and boots. He walked up to the porch, his steps heavy and purposeful. He didn't look like a lawyer or a real estate agent. He looked like the kind of man my grandmother had been afraid of. My blood ran cold. The fight had just come to my front door. I stood there, frozen, as the heavy knock echoed through the house. My mind raced. Should I call Mr. Davies? Should I hide? But my grandmother's words came back to me. Be the light, my Leo. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. The man was huge, his shoulders filling the doorway. He had a weathered face and a grim expression. He looked down at me, his eyes hard. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Yes, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. He stared at me for a long moment as if sizing me up. I could feel the intimidation rolling off him, a palpable force. This was the final test. Then his expression changed. The hardness in his eyes softened, just a little. My name is John Rourke, he said. My father used to work this farm with your grandfather. Your grandmother, she helped my family out when we were in a tight spot years ago. I heard you were back. I heard you were fixing the place up on your own. He gestured back to his truck. The bed was loaded with firewood. Winter's here, he said gruffly. Figured you could use this, no charge. Alara was family. He wasn't a threat. He was a friend, an ally from a past I didn't even know I had. My knees felt weak with relief. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. He just nodded. You need help with anything at all, you just call. We look after our own around here. He and I spent the next hour stacking the firewood on the porch. He didn't mention Oak Valley. He didn't mention Marcus Thorne. But as he was leaving, he paused and looked me in the eye. Your grandmother was the toughest woman I ever knew, he said. She never backed down from a bully. Glad to see that runs in the family. He got in his truck and drove away, leaving me on the porch surrounded by enough firewood to last the winter. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had my grandmother's memory, Mr. Davies' legal mind, and now a community at my back. They couldn't see it, but the roots I was putting down were growing deeper and stronger every day. The resolution didn't come with a bang. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no climactic confrontation. It came quietly, piece by piece, like a slow thaw after a long winter. Mr. Davies' contact in the state attorney's office used the ledger as a roadmap. They started digging into Oak Valley Holdings, into Marcus Thorne's entire empire. They found a pattern of predatory loans, extortion, and money laundering that stretched back decades. My father was just one of many victims. My grandmother's meticulous records were the key that unlocked it all. The news broke in the spring, a quiet article on the back page of the state newspaper at first, then a bigger story as the indictments came down. Marcus Thorne, the untouchable pillar of the community, was arrested. His company crumbled under the weight of the investigation, the pressure on Havenwood, the constant threat that had loomed over my grandmother's life and the beginning of mine simply evaporated. The monster had been dragged into the light, and it had withered. I learned all of this through phone calls from Mr. Davies. I never had to testify. I never even had to see Thorne's face. My grandmother's ledger, her sword, had done the fighting for me. All I had to do was stand my ground. Life on the farm found its own rhythm. The hard work continued. I fixed the porch steps. I painted the house, a fresh, clean white that seemed to glow in the morning sun. I started clearing the overgrown fields, planning to plant a small garden in the same spot my mother used to have hers, according to John Rourke. He and Gus and a few other locals would stop by from time to time, offering advice, lending a tool, or just sharing a cup of coffee on the porch. I was no longer the orphan from the city. I was Leo Vance of the Vance farm. I had a place. I had a name. I belonged. One day, Mr. Davies drove out to see me. He brought a final set of papers from the estate, but I knew that wasn't the real reason he came. We sat on the newly repaired porch, looking out over the fields that were just starting to show new green shoots. It's over, Leo, he said. Thorne took a plea deal. He'll be gone for a long time. The assets of his company are being liquidated to pay back his victims' families. There might even be some restitution for you down the line. I don't need it, I said, and I meant it. I looked at the house, at the barn, at the land stretching out before me. My grandmother already gave me everything I need. He smiled, a genuine warm smile. She did, didn't she? She left you an inheritance, not of money but of character, of strength. That's a rare thing. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the sounds of the farm coming back to life. I thought about the boy I was just a year ago, the one standing outside the orphanage with a garbage bag and $100. He had believed he was nothing, because that's the story he had been told. He had no idea what he was capable of. He had no idea how much he was loved. That's the thing about the stories they tell you. They're only true for as long as you believe them. My inheritance wasn't the house or the land or even the money in the ammo can. It was the truth. The truth that I was not abandoned but protected, not forgotten but cherished. And that truth gave me the one thing I had never had before, a foundation, something solid to build a life on. The scars are still there, of course. They always will be. The years of feeling alone don't just vanish, but they're not open wounds anymore. They're just a part of my story, a reminder of where I came from. But they don't define where I'm going. Home isn't just four walls and a roof. I know that now. It's a story you choose to believe in. It's a foundation you decide to build on, no matter how broken it seems at first. What this whole journey taught me is that you can't choose your beginning, but you can fight like hell for your ending. You can pick up the tools even if your hands are shaking, and you can start to rebuild. If you've ever had to reclaim your own story, if you've ever had to find your own home in the ruins of a past you didn't choose, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. We're building a community here, a place for people who have found their strength in the broken places. Subscribe if you want to be a part of it, if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance to write their own ending. Your story matters, and it's time for you to be the one to tell it.